Joining me now is our political panel. We have Democratic Congressman Chuy Garcia from Illinois, New York Times columnist Charles Blow, and United We Dream Executive Director Greisa Martinez Rosas. All right, guys, thank you for being here. Let's start with Title 42. And Greisa, I want to start with you because you have said that this move will keep people of color from even seeking asylum. So what do you think are the next steps here?
Well, Symone, I think it's clear. Title 42 is cruel and evil. It was dreamt up by Trump and Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller. It has allowed, when we saw the images of Haitian immigrants being whipped by CBP agents, it was connected to this idea. And so what needs to happen now is what the White House has said that it's going to do, appeal in the courts. We need to ensure that we push back against the lies that Republicans want to tell us that we don't have enough and that we can't welcome families and we need to uphold all asylum laws.
Congressman Garcia, I want to turn to you because I'm wondering what legislative options, if any, would there be to counteract this ruling in the future? You heard Julia. She said this is on Congress.
Well, in the House, we've passed legislation, 3 bills that would bring about immigration reform so that people could have the ability to live normally, to work, and to have a pathway to citizenship. It was the Dream and Promise Act. It was the Farm Worker Modernization Act. And in Build Back Better, there were protections for immigrants who are not documented yet to be able to work, travel to their countries of origin, and live in peace. There isn't much more that Congress can do at this juncture, but I'm hoping that in the next month and a half or so that we can deliver on some of what has been passed out of the House that is stagnated in the Senate. But it's pretty clear that Title 42 has little to do with public health. That is one of the vestiges of the Donald Trump period, and that President Biden and many Democrats campaigned on getting rid of it. Just as we welcome Ukrainian asylum seekers at the border, it should be applied universally to anyone seeking asylum. It isn't a guarantee that you can stay here, but it is a guarantee that you can have due process and not live in the cruel conditions at the border.
Well, you will have the last word on that one, sir. I want to move on to abortion access. Oklahoma just passed a bill banning abortions at any point after fertilization. Yes, fertilization. The state already has a Texas-style ban on abortions after 6 weeks. And it is really one of a cluster of states where abortion access is already severely restricted, or even where trigger laws are in place to ban abortion soon after Roe. I want y'all to take a look at the screen because this is the distance from Southwest Texas to Northeast Tennessee, and it is about 1,000 miles, okay? That's how far some folks could have to travel to get the care that they need. For some perspective, that could be as much as 10 tanks of gas round trip. So, Greisa, what are low-income patients who are seeking abortion care supposed to do here?
I mean, Symone, this is just another way in which Republicans and the far right are wanting to advance attacks against Black and brown people. The truth is that undocumented folks, undocumented people that are seeking abortions aren't able to travel those miles, even the ones that you talk about, because there's gates and other ways in which they're not allowed to pass. And so the reality is that I and you and many others watching us today deserve the right to have autonomy over our body. That anyone that says otherwise is advancing a very destructive frame of mind that has cost lives and will continue to cost them. So we have to stand up against them.
I agree with you. Talking about who abortion care hurts the most, Republican Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, folks, he was discussing the state's high maternal mortality rate. And he said, and I'm going to read this quote, he said, African Americans have a higher incidence of maternal mortality. So if you correct our population for race, we're not as much of an outlier as it otherwise appear. He goes on to say he doesn't want to minimize the issue, but for whatever reason, people of color have a higher incidence of maternal mortality. Now, to let that come out of his mouth is just unacceptable, okay? Completely unacceptable. And I'm going to have something more to say about that later. But Charles, what say you?
Well, I think that what we are seeing with the courts in general is a push back towards a states' rights stance. And a states' rights stance in a country that is plagued by all of the isms, racism and sexism, and all of the phobias of homophobia and whatever, is the most dangerous place to be. It is in that states' rights stance that Jim Crow was allowed to rise and not be struck down by the courts when the courts had a chance to do so. Because when you allow state-level politicians to dictate what is allowed for a person's body autonomy or not autonomy, then you're in very kind of sketchy area where full equality can be denied and can be legal. And we're seeing that play out in the abortion arena, but we've already seen it play out on the voting rights arena when they stripped the Voting Rights Act, and we could see it play out on things like gay marriage or whatever. I think we have to really register the danger zone that we are in with the courts because of the position that they are taking, and that these things will, many of them, disproportionately impact people, like you were just saying, African Americans, low-wage people, Hispanics, other racial or ethnic minorities, or minorities who present differently in terms of sexuality or orientation.
Let's stay on and talk about the courts, because I'm from Nebraska, and in Nebraska, judges are appointed, they are not elected. And it wasn't until that I worked a race in college when I was in Tennessee that I realized that judges were elected in some places across the country. But in many places, judges are appointed. If we're talking about the federal bench, it is whoever is in the White House at that time to put judges on the bench. How do we combat the crisis in the courts that we are seeing in so many places across the country?
Well,
everybody's stuck. Look, people were stuck. Everybody was like, I don't even know how to combat the crisis in the courts. It's just people stuck. I guess it was open-ended. Greisa, I want to hear from you. Then Charles, I want to hear from you. Then Congressman, you'll have the last word on it. Let's go.
Yeah, I think that this, what you're describing is really a crisis that we're facing as a country. As an undocumented woman, a DACA recipient, I understand the impact that courts have on our lives. But I also know that there are many, many people right now organizing in your state of Nebraska, in my state of Texas, and all around to ensure that there are more and more people packing the courts, more people that understand their own duty and do not use it as a political core to advance a white nationalist agenda. And so I am here as part of United We Dream and a progressive movement that are ready to take on that fight.
Charles?
And with respect, Symone, to the leaked decision that the court may make public soon. I think that, and my hope is that it will mobilize and energize the electorate. Oftentimes, the same electorate is what are people who have wanted Congress to address critical issues like jobs and the economy, inflation, housing, and education and debt relief, student debt relief. I think there's a potential for people learning about the potential and a subsequent decision by the court that could energize. And I think that will have a bearing on who is elected president in the next few years, and certainly the makeup of Congress. Of course, the outcome of pending elections in states like Georgia and Texas will also have a bearing. That's why we need to be watching closely. But I think that all of this underscores the importance that elections have consequences and that we better get ourselves to those voting polls.
You know, Charles, they're telling me we have to go, but you introduced this conversation about the courts. And so I'm going to have you back, my friend, so we can talk more at length about this, because I do think it's a crisis that people aren't paying enough attention to. Illinois Congressman Chuy Garcia, Charles Blow, and Greisa Martinez Rosas, thank you all very, very much.